This is lesson 411 in Charlemagne and the Germanic Kingdoms. We got the 411 on him. And let's start with three discovery questions. Number one, how did these Germanic tribes conquer Rome? And question number two, how did Rome conquer the Germanic tribes? And what came out of a merge between the two of them? Well, we've got the early medieval ages. They went from about 476 to 1050 CE, or you can say AD, either way. Its beginning is dated for the year that the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, was overthrown. And the early Middle Ages, this time period, 476 to 1050, was a period of economic decline. And then you've got the High Middle Ages. High Middle Ages go from about 1050 to about 1300 CE. And the end date, this 1300, is dated for the approximate year that a little ice age hit Europe. It lasted for centuries, actually. But this was a period of advancement towards a higher level of civilization. After this, you do have the late Middle Ages that takes us into the Renaissance, and we're not too worried about the late Middle Ages right now. So early medieval timeline, you've got some big things going on. Remember, from 500 to 900, that was a recovery period after Rome's fall, and Christian missionaries worked in Northern Europe, and the Franks defeated the Muslims in France in the year 732. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about Charlemagne's empire. Charlemagne ran this empire from the year 800 to the year 814. And then 1018, you've got the beginning of the Christian reconquest of Spain. Spain had been taken over by Muslims at that point, and that Christian reconquest of Spain was also going to take centuries. Another big banner year is the year 1066, and that marks the Normans conquering England. And then another year that's down at the bottom right, 1096 to 1270, the Crusades. The Crusades lasted about 200 years. Germanic tribes before the fall of Rome. Lots of Germanic tribes lived inside of Rome's borders and outside of Rome's borders before Rome fell. Tribes such as the Goths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Lombards, the Burgundians, and of course, not to mention the largest tribe of all, the Franks. Romans considered all of them to be barbarians. The Huns. The Huns were not a Germanic tribe. They actually came out of Central Asia. They appeared in Europe around 370 CE. They invaded all of Europe from Central Asia. And even the Germanic tribes ran from these guys, and they ran straight into the relative safety of the Roman Empire. The Visigoths were one of these tribes. Rome let them into their empire so that they could escape from the Huns. But in the year 410, King Alaric of the Visigoths turned against Rome, and he got help from Germanic slaves who were living in Rome. As we know, Rome is a slave society with a lot of slaves. A lot of those slaves were foreigners. And Alaric defeated the Roman army, and he sacked Rome itself. And when that happened, other Germanic tribes also felt free to settle in Roman territories such as Spain and Gaul and England and Sicily. Conditions in Western Europe during and after the fall of the Roman Empire. These conditions were marked with things like constant warfare, unsafe travel, an almost total collapse of trade, roads and bridges going unrepaired, cities and towns abandoned. Life is becoming increasingly unsafe, and life is becoming increasingly rural as cities are depopulated. So wealthy people are starting to move into fortified homes out in the country, and people are gradually becoming illiterate. Education is breaking down, except in churches and monasteries. In barbarian tribes, they were in control. There's no central government left. There's no unified law and order left. There's no longer a common language. And food shortages grew. So let's talk about this tribe called the Franks. They were the largest Germanic tribe, and they occupied Gaul, which today we call France. And in fact, the German word for France is very telling because the German word Reich actually means kingdom, and the German word for the country of France is Frankreich, which simply means kingdom of the Franks. So the German name for France actually goes back to its Frankish history. And so Gaul is modern day France. France is named after the Franks, and the Franks had two important dynasties. Luckily for us, we know what dynasties are. And so they had the Merovingians, ruled from the late 400s to the late 700s CE. And then after them, you had the Carolingians. And the Carolingians ruled from the late 700s to the year 887. So these Merovingian rulers, they came first. They came before the Carolingians. And the Franks emerged as the strongest of these Germanic tribes. And the Franks were the first of the barbarians to accept Christianity. Frankish kings raised armies by granting lands to their nobles in exchange for military service. They called that patronage. We're also going to call that something else very soon. So you had three famous Merovingian rulers. You had Clovis, you had Charles Martel, and by the way, martel is the French word for hammer, and then you had Childeric III. Merovingian kings and the church. Let's start with Clovis, Clovis of the Franks. Clovis actually had a Christian education, and he accepted Christianity. He united all the various Franks by force, and he became the first Christian Germanic king. And when your ruler in this time period converts to a certain religion, guess what? You're doing the same thing whether you like it or not. So he made all of the Franks into a Christian people. And so now what we see here is we see the Catholic Church playing an increasingly large role in Europe because of this Frankish king Clovis. Well, then we have Charles Martel, the Hammer. Now, his official court title was Mayor of the Palace. So he was not a king, but he did hold a very powerful, noble position as Mayor of the Palace. And the Muslims were making military expeditions into Gaul from Spain, which they already controlled. And Charles Martel is credited with halting this Muslim advance, this Muslim invasion of Europe from Spain and into Gaul, when he won the Battle of Tours in the year 732. This battle is also known as the Battle of Poitiers in 732. Tours and Poitiers were the same battle, the same event. The Carolingian Kings. The first Carolingian king of significance was named Pippin the Short. He was actually the son of Charles Martel, and he also held that position of Mayor of the Palace, and held that title. So he didn't start off as a king. Pippin protected Rome from a Germanic tribe that was attacking Rome called the Lombards in northern Italy. And he wound up taking numerous Italian towns from the Lombards, and he gave these towns that he conquered to the Pope, Pope Stephen II. And so this giving of these towns that he took from the Lombards to the Pope was called the donation of Pippin. And so the Pope organized these new possessions that had been given to him as the Papal States, establishing an actual political kingdom for the Pope to run. So he's not only running the church, but he's also running politically this area called the Papal States. Well, Pippin seized power from the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, in the year 751. And when that happened, the Pope anointed Pippin king of the Franks in 754. Of course, he was quite grateful to Pippin because of the donation of Pippin. And Pippin died in 768. Well, Pippin's son was none other than Charlemagne. By the way, if you break the name Charlemagne down, well, Magna, you can see Magna at the end of it. That's kind of short for magnificent, and Charles is Carl, so or Charles, and so Charlemagne is actually Charles the Magnificent. So Charlemagne becomes maybe the new Roman emperor. Rome's been needing a new emperor, hasn't it? Charlemagne ruled as king of the Franks from 768 to the year 814. And he also expanded that practice of giving land to nobles in exchange for loyalty and service, which we saw a few minutes ago, calling it patronage. As Charlemagne expanded his kingdom, his power grew, and he was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in the year 800 AD, which may sound strange because, as we know, the Western Roman Empire fell centuries before. But there's always this hope that somehow, some way, in some form, maybe Western Europe could somehow return to its greater glory. So that's why he was crowned Emperor of the Romans. So Charlemagne's empire, Charlemagne established a new capital in the city of Aachen. And he built a palace at Aachen that was designed to imitate a Roman palace. It was quite large. And he also established a school to teach the children of nobles under his rule. And he brought the best scholars for that school that he could find. Charlemagne himself could not read or write. He considered, and this was probably not unusual, he considered the ability to read and write a talent, which he simply did not possess. I hope you don't feel that way. Charlemagne's, quote, Roman Empire. Charlemagne was crowned, quote, Emperor of the Romans in the year 800 by Pope Leo III, but his empire was still very much a Frankish Carolingian empire rather than an actual Roman empire. Now later, Holy Roman emperors who were in charge of this new entity that we're going to find out is called the Holy Roman Empire, they would view their empire as having descended from Charlemagne's, quote, Roman Empire. And this made Charlemagne the first emperor in Western Europe since the fall of Rome, the real Rome, that is, that fell in 476. This established Western Europe's independence from the Eastern Byzantine Empire, which we just studied. And it gave Western Europe some political and religious unity. And it established the concept of Christendom. Christendom being a Europe-wide community of Christians. Christianity became the established religion of all of Europe. Invasion, the Vikings. Outside invasion nearly destroyed the Carolingian kingdoms. Outside invasions from all over the place, from Muslims, from Magyars, those are ethnic Hungarians, from Vikings. And the most threatening attacks came from the Vikings, these raiders from Scandinavia. Vikings were also skilled explorers, not just raiders. They were also great traders. They sailed to Greenland, to Iceland, and to North America. Viking raids isolated communities, severely weakening monarchs' central authority, and they adversely affected trade beginning in the AD 900s. There were three groups of Vikings. You had your Norwegian Vikings. They explored the North Atlantic islands of Greenland and Iceland and became that first group to reach North America. Then you had the Danes. The Danes accomplished a couple of things. They conquered England at one time, and they established a Viking state in Normandy, that's in western France. And also you had the Swedes from Ukraine and Russia. They became known as the Kievan Rus. Viking culture. Vikings were a polytheistic people. That was their religion, a polytheistic religion. They worshipped gods of war, whose names we know, like Thor and Loki and Odin. They began their raids actually as a way to relieve overpopulation in their own homelands. As they conquered, they began to settle in some of these lands that they had targeted. They wrote epic sagas called Eddas, which told tales of brave warriors and battles, tales like Beowulf. They had storytellers that recited these tales until a written language was developed using Roman letters and Roman numbers. Scandinavian history. The Vikings were located on the Scandinavian peninsula. Their society boasted farmers, traders, merchants, craftsmen, explorers, and Vikings. And they were among the world's first sea powers. They built shallow but sturdy ships. Shallow ships were easy to navigate in shallow waters like rivers, and you could easily beach these ships and go off and make raids on land. A couple of famous Vikings were Eric Bloodaxe and Harold Bluetooth.